I'll get us started then. Okay, so thank you for the opportunity to share today. Like Pastor Jim said, we're doing a little bit of, not a little bit, we're doing something I'm very passionate about, which is directly connecting history and the Word of God, because the Word of God is itself history and it helps tell the story of a specific period of time and it cross connects with lots of other resources throughout history. So we're going to talk about Bible archaeology. This is going to be a slight series. So this first one tonight is going to be more of an introduction to what I mean when I say Bible archaeology and how it can be a really beneficial tool for us to help encourage our faith, but how while it is a tool, it is not the only thing we should be looking for. It should help build our faith, but our confirmation comes from Christ. So I always want to come from that angle. So we're going to talk about what archaeology is. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of the process that archaeologists and the anthropologists use and how that crosses into what my personal professional interest is, which is primary sources and manuscripts. And those two things are complementary to one another in an incredible amount of ways. So I have slides, which I usually like to do for Bible study, but this in no way is a Ashley talking only time. So please feel free to raise your hand, ask a question. I'll do my best to
I
keep
got a
track.
question.
Yep, Pastor
This,
Jim.
this one's for you, Mandy. I'm sorry. Is socioeconomic things of in the past considered archaeology?
Anthropology.
That's a very fun question. Archaeology is about the physical record left behind and what we can learn from it.
Yep.
So that would be either history or historical cultural anthropology.
So it would be a little bit because that's what I think I'm going to want to ask
Well,
about. But
anthropology is an umbrella term. Archaeology
Agreed.
is under it,
Yeah.
but largely no, unless we have the physical records and primary sources.
okay,
Yeah. So anthropology is a really big umbrella term, and it is interdisciplinary and it connects to a lot of other science and history fields, which is what makes anthropology such a rich area of study because it is not just one thing and it brings perspective. So, can that looks a little small. Let me zoom in so you can see it a little bit better. Best of my
You want me
ability.
to list the five branches of anthropology while you do that?
If you'd like to. Oh no, we're
Don't
doing
have
that
to.
thing
I
where my
just
computer crashes.
thought
Okay.
I'd vamp for you.
No, it's okay. I'm just gonna show it and then I'm gonna read it to you anyway. So first, what is archaeology? So Mandy actually did me a little bit of a favor to explain this a little bit already. And if you don't know about Mandy, Mandy has a degree in anthropology. So history is my area and cultural and anthropology is Mandy's, which is why we really work together well when it comes to this kind of study. So I won't volunteer her to answer questions, but she's a great resource if you can get her ear. So for
Volunteer me.
okay. So for today's purposes, what is archaeology? I did some polling from resources that are like publicly accessible that I can focus on and point you to. So I looked at the National Park Service and how they explain archaeology because there's a lot of archaeology on public lands. So first and foremost, it's the study of ancient and recent human past through material remains, which is exactly what Mandy just said. And remains does not only mean things like skeletal remains. It means things like artifacts like pottery, stelae, various types of like cuneiform written tablets. All of those things are part of archaeology. They are physical
Weapons.
objects and remains of a culture and people that are found in physical places. Archaeological sites is any place where those remains of past human activities are found. And there are many kinds of archaeological sites. There is no one size fits all when it comes to what culture means and how we understand it and how we discover it. Over the course of the next like 40 minutes or so, I will probably use the term artifact quite a lot. So I just wanted to highlight that here that an artifact is archaeologists analyze artifacts to learn more about the people who made and used them. They are one of our biggest clues when it comes to what these things mean and help us connect in that interdisciplinary way. I am very quickly just going to mention my computer's being really salty with me. So, Pastor Jim, you need to watch for people with questions, okay?
okay.
Okay. So, from a background perspective, I first wanted to come with the fact that biblical archaeology provides a better understanding of the cultures of the Bible, and people are part of those cultures. So, archaeology itself is a historical discipline that examines the material remains of past culture alongside preserved literature from those cultures or cultures around them. Archaeology provides a vital avenue for understanding ancient everyday life. So when we look at the Bible tells the story of a couple thousand years of history from the focus of the people of Israel, right? Through the story of the Jews, but it also gives us a lot of context about people that existed around the Jews. So archaeology helps corroborate both historical events and historical people. There's many examples of biblical people and events that appear in the archaeological record, which is what makes it so exciting. They are supporting one another. Very often, when people want context, if they are looking to the Bible, they're actually seeking it as a tool, as a historical document, as a primary source to help support those things. So we find evidence of Old Testament writings like the kings David, Hezekiah, Jehu, Omri, Ahab, and many others. And I'll actually get into a further, closer line detail on David a little bit further on. But I have an example here that you see Egyptian. You got that, Pastor Jim? Joe? Egyptian, Assyrian, Babylonian, and Persian rulers are all mentioned in the Old Testament, and they're invariably evidenced in inscriptions on their home turf. So one of my personal favorite things is not only are we finding this evidence in the Bible itself, but we're also finding evidence of Bible figures in secular sources or in the sources that would have been Israel's enemies at the time. So the fact that they were adversaries actually proves that they existed. So major events receive similar verification, like the capture of Lachish, the despoiling of Jerusalem, the Edomite aggression, and Jeroboam's building of a temple in Dan. So again and again, archaeology is a really fascinating tool to bring life to these people and stories that we otherwise may struggle to have a connection with. History itself and reading of history is about that connection and understanding. And archaeology helps create that really excellent connection for the people and cultures that anthropology likes to help us learn about. Any questions so far?
No.
Okay.
You got to have questions, or this will go fast.
No, I've got 12 slides, so
Oh.
I wouldn't worry. I'm not going to run out of stuff to say, trust me, but I do also welcome questions. Okay. So biblical archaeology is broadly one of the most common ways that they connect directly is that it is historic record archaeology. So like I mentioned to you a couple of minutes ago, the National Park Service is a really interesting resource when learning about these studies of histories and the support that they get from one another. So I have this description here. If you go on the National Park website, which I'm happy to provide the link to you, they have this description of different types of archaeology and specifically how they date sites and artifacts. When you go through their entire chart, you see that biblical archaeology and the tools that are used with the cross comparison really becomes, something really doesn't want me to teach this to everybody. My computer just froze. Okay. So when you look at the historic record and you compare it with the artifacts, you then have the opportunity to connect the precise dates that are described in things like government records. So like the Annals of the King, when you think of chronicles, diaries, so personal accounts, newspapers or the equivalent, or other historic records depending on the time period. So absolute dating attempts to pinpoint a discrete known interval in time, such as a day, a year, a century, or millennia, but very few artifacts recovered from archaeological sites can be absolutely dated. But even though it can be rare, it is something that you see again and again in biblical examples.
Ashley,
Yes.
what is the process for dating the objects?
Excellent question. I'm going to get into it in a minute, but the very high level version is it is a cross comparison. When you're talking about archaeological artifacts and digs, you are looking at the physical evidence of the item, right? Sometimes they use things like carbon dating, but very often they're also comparing the material itself that's used. That's why we have things like the Iron Age and the Bronze Age, and we name ages in that way because those were the types of metallurgy that were occurring at that time. So when you look at things that are earthenware pottery, there's a general idea based on previous findings what the dates might be. And then you can use that to look at other external sources to cross compare and try to get a closer pinpoint date. Does that make sense?
Yes, but like the Bronze Age, Golden Age, whatever, did
Mhm.
that come from people's writings? Is that what how we know about it?
Partly.
Partly. So the terms like Bronze Age and Iron Age, that actually breaks down quite literally to the metals that were used at that time because metallurgy got more complex over time. So that's one way of measuring, but it also comes with other tools that are found, what types of weapons are being created and used. It really comes down to what was being created at the time and then being able to substantiate it with other things created. And very often that is the written word. So the written word helps support the artifact, and the artifact helps support the written word.
Okay, good.
Pastor Jim, I'm afraid to click anything, but there's two things in the chat. Can you read them off, please?
Sure. I tried. I couldn't see them. Okay. Uh, Sabrina, is this Sabrina and Miss? Oh, I'm cry. Cut. Great.
Sorry, I said a mouthful and I'm eating, so I was
That's
just
okay.
saying
That's all right. Cosmogony and missiology were biblical study covers types of study. It's an excellent right brain approach. Oops.
So
I'm
basically, cosmogony and missiology. Those are two studies of the Bible, and it blows your mind if you are not STEM-minded. So the right brain perceives the Bible. It's only real if it meets scientific measures.
Okay, and
Left brain says, hey, I'm emotional. I believe this just because my heart says yes, and it ties the two. So when you're ministering to someone that is STEM minded, most of the pushback is prove it. They need to see it under proven through a scientific method. So what Ashley is covering for us tonight and truly exciting is what cosmogony and missiology supports. It says, see God in the details. And so through a scientific lens or a STEM-minded lens, they are proving out that the Bible is real, and it's leaving them speechless. Because most STEM-minded people do not believe in God because he can't be seen, measured, tasted, smelled, the whole gamut. So sorry, I nerded out for a moment because it blew my mind when I did this, and I'm totally left brain I just believe God is God. That's all I know. I don't need any type of proof around it. But when ministering, I do.
Well, it's also something that there's a real beautiful irony to it because many of the discoveries that are the most profound were identified because there were secular scholars hunting to, in fact, disprove the Bible.
disprove the Bible.
Instead, they found evidence of it. There's a really great example I'll show an image of later on, which is a particular artifact that had writing on it, but there's a gap in the writing. And there was one scholar that said, this says House of David. And there were other contrary scholars that came up with a different interpretation. So then they started using the different developing sciences, and then they were able to do an imaging of it, which saw the impression, right? So like a different version of radiology. And in doing that, they uncovered more characters of the language that it was, which I apologize, I can't remember if it was Hebrew or not. And it now more clearly shows that it says House of David. So in trying to disprove it, they proved it instead.
They proved it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. What's the scripture?
To the two very
He
thoughtful
confounds
people.
the wise.
Yeah.
He confounds the wise. And I love it. Okay, sorry.
You're fine. That's the point of this, is to share the excitement. To both people that offered to help me with Zoom, my computer just keeps going black. There's nothing either of you can do, but thank you. At the moment, it's working. So moving on to the next one, which kind of goes to Sabrina's point, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the ways when we think about proving and what that pathway to proof can be. So artifacts aren't the only way, right, to prove the existence of a historic figure, but it's certainly the most exciting. We as humans love to see things, not just hear things or see the written word. From the perspective of what I do professionally, I can tell you that people get the most excited to see one of two things: photographs of people throughout history or signatures because there's something tangible about names and faces. Artifacts has that same kind of feeling because someone at some point in history touched this thing. But not every person and event in history requires that kind of archaeological confirmation in order to be substantiated, to be proven or corroborated. So, for example, something important to think about is that nomadic populations are hard to trace in the archaeological record because obviously they had no single place that they tended to be. So many of the finds for nomadic people, like the Israelites, are more often chance than intentional, which almost makes them richer because they're being proven without being searched in that same way. So the Old Testament patriarchs were nomads, and the Exodus community spent years wandering in the vast Sinai desert. So when we don't immediately have this kind of rich artifactual find, it doesn't need to be discouraging because the historical context of that time explains some of what we may not find immediately. So outside of those artifacts, the most common evidence for people we tend to see are things like inscriptions on architectural buildings and structures, whether that be names of kings or battles that were won. In Egypt, in particular, there's these really interesting carvings on some of their buildings of battles won by their various pharaohs. In those battles and things that they won is where a lot of substantiated evidence for other rulers comes from. This pharaoh defeated this king. You're then seeing outside of the original culture a reference to this person, and it substantiates that existence.
Would you say this is why there's a big debate on like the Amalekites?
A little bit louder, Chuck.
Would you say this is why there's maybe debate on the Amalekites because there's not like two different sources?
Yes, but I'm going to share something because I listed one of my favorite ones is for many years.
Are you going to say the Hittites? Because I'm going to stop you because it's my point later.
Okay. Is that you're going to talk about the Philistines?
It's all right. Go ahead.
For many years, Bible scholar, not a Bible antagonist, would say the story of David and all these things weren't true because there's no physical evidence that the Philistines ever existed. And then they found several things. They found some stuff in Egypt that mentioned it, but in the city of Ekron, which was a Philistine city, they found a listing of all the kings of the city of Ekron and the Philistine Empire, and all of a sudden they all had to have a good serving of humble pie.
Well, that's how it tends to work, but it's also the great part of coming and doing those things. So to the original question, yes, scholarship is very skeptical when it's difficult to prove a figure through another source. It is also interesting, though, and ironically, I don't, in this presentation today or this discussion today, go into the proven historicity of Jesus, but Jesus as a historical figure has, I think, I don't want to exaggerate, so I will say at least 10 times over, substantiating documentation and corroboration than figures like Attila the Hun, Genghis Khan, and other rulers that we firmly believe existed. There are way more records, both secular and non, of Jesus that prove that he existed, was a person, and was crucified. Yeah. So people will doubt when they want to doubt, but people no longer try to say Jesus of Nazareth did not exist because there's simply too much corroborating evidence across different source types that support that it happened, and that there are kings and rulers and people in the Bible that have been proven through external source that then they have to go back to the biblical account and go, oh, that looks like that's exactly what happened.
The confirmation is an important phrase there because you generally need two independent sources to proffer a theory. So there's lots of things that people are like, I believe this, but I don't have a secondary source or a corroboration. So you can't bring it forward as a paper. You need more information.
Right. Which these other sources that I mentioned here are some of the other ways that you can do that. So art obviously is a big one. It's another part of the human experience. Money is actually a very large one that's used very often, particularly for things like rulers. So having figureheads of a king on a coin is a very interesting thing because you will find in modern day Britain, when they do digs, they will find Roman coins from the time that they were occupied by Rome. And they can time when Rome was there based on the coins and what Caesar is on it. But to Pastor Jim's excitement about the Philistines and other sources proving King David, here's a complimentary supporting thing. So there are actually many now extra biblical sources that demonstrate the historicity, or like he existed in history, of King David. He was once heavily considered to effectively be mythological, like a story-based figure, but there's now been building evidence of the various accounts of David in the Bible, not even just naming places and battles that he served in, but actual direct sources of written context of the House of David. So pictured here is an object known as the Moabite stone, or Meshastele. And it talks about multiple occasions and battles, and it actually comes from the antagonist of David. So it's an outside source referencing him as not just existing, but having been in battle with the Moabites. There's also, this might be the one Pastor Jim is talking about, which is the Tel Dan stele. Is this the one you're talking about, Pastor Jim?
Go ahead.
So this is the other one that specifically mentions the House of David, which proves, in the terms of history and archaeology, a dynasty coming after King David. So it proves both that he existed and the description of the fact that it followed down a line from King David. So the fragments belong to a victory piece that was recording the exploits of the king of Aram. Where I looked at this particular blog post, which you can see here, it's the Bible Archaeology report, they give an assumption or a studied theory of which king it is, but the name isn't given. And it just talks about the fact that the king of Israel and his ally, the king of the House of David. So it's an external source. And again, it's not simply an artifact or simply a written record. It is actually a little bit of both, but it's something physical that attributes to his existence. That's one method of proof.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about David. I was talking about the nation of the Philistines.
Gotcha. So I will also talk about the Hittites in a minute, which is probably also related to what you're talking about. I really like Christina's comment. Historically, it's always the ops that prove your existence and success, which, what a mood. Absolutely. So we talked a little bit, or a lot bit, about proving people. So I also wanted to obviously talk about proving places. And yelling at my computer again.
Sorry.
It's fine. Nope. Give me 1 second.
No problem.
When we talk about proving places, a lot of the same tools are what we use. And then we yell at Ashley's computer. I should use a different device for this. Okay. You're going to let me scroll? Okay. So I have to get closer. It's small for me now. But when we're proving places, going back to Bill's earlier question, cross-dating is a huge part of how we prove places and things like that. And it's also relative. So much like with artifacts and proving people, getting precise absolute dates can be difficult, but you can get the relative idea of these places and when they existed and help support it through the various stories that are there. So the most common evidence that helps us prove places is similar, but not exclusively the same. So things like inscriptions, like we talked about, like the Tel Dan stele, and then architectural ruins. So I'll think things like Jericho, right? For a long time, there was no proof of Jericho, and they didn't think Jericho existed. And then they excavated, and I believe Jericho is the one where they didn't go deep enough because there had been a new established city on top of the ruins of Jericho. So they found the first set of ruins, said, well, this can't be Jericho. And then later on, they continued to dig in the site, and they went further down, and they found even older ruins, which turned out to be the city of Jericho. So that archaeological, physical place, architectural place, helped prove it. Again, art, things like palace frescoes. A really good example of palace frescoes that help tell a story would actually be when you think to Pompeii, the surviving smaller estate and small village of Herculaneum had art preserved inside that was not damaged by all of the ash that went through all of Pompeii. So there's a lot to be learned from the art within Herculaneum that may have otherwise been lost because of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. And one of my personal favorite ones is maps and other documents. Sometimes people get uncomfortable with maps, partially because they're a little harder to substantiate exactly when they were created and who wrote them. But that's when, as Mandy talked about, that cross-dating and that confirmation is important. But it can also tell us a lot about what people thought existed at the time. So it's that fun personal element on top of simply proving the existence of something. So moving to what I think is at least complementary to what Pastor Jim was saying in proving of a people, for a long time, there was belief that the Hittites did not exist, that they were only in the Bible, and that they were a people that were, much like they felt David was mythological, were a mythological foil to King David. And ironically, when they went to excavate in Troy, they actually disproved this. I personally find that very ironic because they also felt that Turkey, I think I used the wrong words there, that Troy did not exist. And they also found that Troy was a real city also in Turkey. So several excavations in Turkey helped prove really phenomenal people and places that existed that felt too big to be real. And then they were later.
There are almost 6 layers of ruins on top of what they eventually found to be Troy. They just kept rebuilding cities on the same site.
Right.
Also, when you pause, I would like to tell you my favorite way that they prove settlements because it's so silly.
Please, go for it. Do they lick the rock? Is that what you're going to tell me?
No. One of the most indicative archaeological clues for settlements is trash. They call it a midden, but it's where they dispose of things. Like, you can usually tell if something is a Jewish settlement by the lack of pig bones in their middens, because that was forbidden to eat. Like, we have at least 3 examples of archaeological middens here in Rhode Island, and they're very full of, obviously, clamshells, deer bones, things like that give us a huge clue into the eating patterns of the Narragansett.
Yeah. That's interesting. I wonder if things like a fishing weir would help say the same thing.
Chuck wanted to know if there was any biblical reference to Göbekli when they looked in Turkey. Archaeological reference.
So I didn't specifically look for that, so I can't answer that off the cuff. But I can share with you what I did find, which is when they were working on the excavations in Turkey, they actually found the Hittite capital city of Hattusa, which is modern day Turkey, and they didn't find it until the late 19th and early 20th century. But they then continued to have more discoveries, and they found many records which corroborated other extra biblical references to the Hittite civilization. And it's actually now one of the largest tourist locations in Turkey, which is really fascinating to me. But it also proves like Uriah the Hittite in 2 Samuel is a very important figure of discussion in the time of King David. So the discovery of this also helped prove yet another figure in the Davidic story.
You'd be amazed how much we've learned about them in the last century. I unintentionally know so much about the Hittite kings.
It's remarkable how much we discover, and that those discoveries have nothing but the opportunity to enrich our understanding culturally and biblically, because those two things go together. All right. So
amen.
Thanks, Sabrina. So this is kind of just a little bit of a summary of what we've been saying for the last half an hour or so. But first and foremost, when we're going through these exercises of thinking